And so the origins of Armenia, if you see here on page 1, right, the Armenian state here was established around 860 BC. Okay, and the kingdom of Armenia, it's been around for a long time. But here's the interesting part, that from the 12 disciples of Jesus, 2 of them made it to Armenia. 2 of them actually made it there and were martyred there, and they still have the tombs there. And so the Christian witness or the influence was very early. And then in 301 BC, Gregory the Illuminator, 301 or CE, AD, 301 AD, sorry. So after 301 AD, Gregory the Illuminator came and he won over the king and the government, and the entire nation adopted Christianity as the official religion. Before they were idol worshippers. And so Armenia was the first Christian nation in the world. Armenia was actually the first Christian nation in the world, even before Constantine. Okay? And so that says a lot. And so Christianity is their official religion, adopted in 301. Right? And can we put some of these maps up here? So we'll have some maps where Armenia is. You'll see here, it's actually north of Iraq and Iran, okay, and it's surrounded really by Muslim nations. Okay, here's another one. We have 4 different maps because actually through history, Armenia has changed in their geography because they've been overtaken by other empires, and the modern, or this is 1920. So this was right during the Armenian genocide, which we'll talk about, okay? And it's right next to Turkey, Georgia. Hey, who did that? No, I saw it over here. It's my son. I mean, the apple doesn't fall far from the tree. I don't know what else to say. So it's been so fun in class because I'm like, oh my goodness, that's me. But like, I'm like, oh my, I apologize to all the students for my DNA. I mean, there's not much I can do. But okay, I mean, in a good way, you know. And so here's Turkey, Georgia. There's Armenia, Azerbaijan, which they've had a lot of conflict with and continue to have. And then here's Iran and Kurdistan, Iraq down this way. And so I think there's one more, right? And so here, which we'll share more of this, or Ali will share more of this, but there was a Western and Eastern Armenia, and actually the borders of Armenia now were made by Stalin, by Russia, right? He just divided, I mean, they were the empire. Before that, it was the Ottoman Empire for 400 years. And so Stalin just drew lines and said, okay, here we go. This is Azerbaijan, this is Armenia, and this is what he did. And so that's how the borders that we have right now. But historic Armenia is actually much further into Turkey. Okay, and that's really important, and she'll share more about that. So just so you know where it's at, it's up north, just up north of Iraq. All right. Let me jump to E, and then we'll have her come up. So E, there's actually, Armenia has lots of parallels with Israel. Both Armenia and Israel are the only nations that there has been a covenant made with a physical sign in their land. And this is really significant because Armenia in the Bible is Ararat. Okay, if you read ancient Ararat, the mountains of Ararat, it's mentioned 4 times in the scriptures. This is Armenia, the mountains of Armenia. And so it's in Genesis 8. It's when Noah's in the flood, and the Noah's ark. Remember, think about all of the world is flooded, right? And there's no land. The waters start receding, and God can take his ark and put it anywhere. It's very significant. And guess where he chooses to land the ark? Genesis 8, right? on the mountains of Ararat, which is Armenia. Right? This is where he began civilization once again through Noah's family, right? On the mountains of Ararat in Armenia. Number two, both nations suffered a Holocaust. Israel by Nazi Germany, we all know that. Armenia by the Ottoman Empire, which is called the Armenian Genocide. The Armenian Genocide. Minimum 1.5 million Armenians were killed by the Ottomans, which is modern-day Turkey now, and in 1915 to 1923. Now, what's really interesting, this is, remember, the dates, 1915 to 1923, Hitler, when he was going after the Jewish people, he actually referenced this Armenian genocide that the Ottoman Empire had carried out, and said, the Ottoman Empire went after the Armenians and no one stopped them. We can go after the Jews and kill them and eradicate them, and no one will stop us. I mean, he referenced them, and what's amazing is the nation of Turkey still does not acknowledge that there was a genocide. They still don't acknowledge it, and it's like there was no Holocaust, there was no genocide, and they're revising history, or not receiving or believing history. So both nations suffered a Holocaust. Okay, number three, Israel endured 400 years of oppression under Egypt. Armenia suffered under the Ottomans for 400 years. Israel endured 70 years of oppression under Babylon, which we've talked quite a bit. And Armenia was under the Soviet control for 70 years. And then most of their population has lived outside their land. This diaspora of the Armenian people. There's about 3 million Armenians that live inside the land, and around 7 million outside of the land. Like, there's more Armenians outside of the nation, of their homeland, just like Israel, than there is those living in there. And so that's just a little bit about Armenia. I want to ask if you come up and just talk about this Armenian genocide a little bit. And so her parents escaped through it.
Well, grandparents.
Or grandparents. All right. Ask whatever, which graph do you want?
The last map, please. Yeah, so Roger pretty much said almost everything I was going to say as historically. But so I just wanted to give a couple of points concerning this matter, and specifically Armenian genocide. So we are Armenians, but we were born in Lebanon. And a lot of people ask, okay, so are you Lebanese or are you Armenian? Well, we are Lebanese by nationality, but we are Armenian by ethnicity. And how we ended up there is through the Armenian genocide. So before Christ, around 70 before Christ, almost all of this area was conquered by Tikran, who was he was a king, who was an Armenian king. And these areas were all majorly inhabited by Armenians. But this kingdom here, Cilicia, it became an official kingdom in the 11th century after Christ. And this is historic Armenia. So after the death of our Lord, and death and resurrection of our Lord, two of his disciples, Thaddeus and Bartholomew, went and spread the gospel in this area. They went into a pagan land, because Armenia at that time was fully pagan. They worshipped the sun, and they worshipped different gods, pretty much like the Romans and the Greek empires back then. So they evangelized this area, and as Roger said, in 300 AD, Armenia became the first nation to become a Christian and to adopt Christianity as their official national religion. And and as Roger said, those two disciples were actually martyred in this area. So after becoming the first nation, they pretty much thrived. They actually destroyed all the shrines and all the temples, and they set up churches, monasteries. They thrived for pretty much a couple of centuries until they were invaded by different nations. And starting from 7th century, they were invaded by Seljuks, so they had to move from this area and migrate here. And in the 11th century, this kingdom was formed. It was the kingdom of Cilicia. It's pretty much Antioch. And Tarsus around here was like a capital. So, but this kingdom actually fell in the 13th century, around 13th, 14th century, and they were invaded by Mamluks and Seljuks, and eventually in the 14th century, Turks came from the east, Turkish tribes, and they took over this area. They reached all the way to Constantinople, which they later on called Istanbul. So, but Armenians continued to live in these areas all throughout those times. And this kingdom of Cilicia, after the Ottoman Empire was formed in the 15th century, in around the 17th century, its name was changed into Adana, which is today, that is the name that they adopt for it. But so until the 19th century, Armenians continued to live in all these areas. And around late 19th century, the Turkish government had started perpetrating lots of massacres against the Armenians here. So Armenians, all of them here were Christians, and Turkey was an Islamic nation at that time. And they started massacring, but the biggest massacre happened in 1915 when they organized and perpetrated the execution of the major intellectuals of the Armenians who lived in this area. So there were intellectuals in Istanbul, doctors, lawyers, teachers, pharmacists. They executed them publicly in 1915. So they went after the heads at first, they executed them, and eventually they took over all their wealth, their practices, and everything. And about the Armenians in these areas, what they did is they gathered the men, they sent them off to war, and they died in the war, and some of them, they massacred some of the men, and what was left was just the helpless women, the children, and the elderly. So what they made is they made them walk from these areas into the desert here. It was called the Death March. They were supposed to die in the desert. On my dad's side of the family, my grandpa was from this area here. He had gone to a neighboring village for provisions. When he returned, they found that all the village was placed in the village church and burned alive. And on my mom's side of the family, they lived around here, right above Syria, here. And they lived on mountain chains, and they had a waterfront. They saw the Turkish troops coming, so what they did is they ran to the mountaintops and overseeing this sea here, where there was actually Navy warship, a French Navy warship, because it was the First World War. They did a banner on which it was a white bed sheet. They sewed on it a red cross, and they waved it. And the ship that was here in these waters, they could see the banner. They contacted them. They learned what was happening. They saw the troops coming, like all the Turkish troops coming over to these people. And the commander of that ship, Louis d'Artiche du Fournay, he was a French Navy officer. He contacted his superiors. He asked for help, like, what should we do? This nation is being slaughtered there if we don't help them. He didn't receive any clear instructions on what to do, but he was a good Christian. He's like, I'm not going to let them die over there. He put them on ships, 4,000 people who had survived, because the rest of them actually died in that battle. He brought them all the way here to Egypt, to Port Said. And later on, Lebanon was colonized by France, so he bought a little land here, right where I'm showing in Lebanon. It was a valley, and they transported the people from Egypt there. That's where my mom was born. That's an all-Armenian village. That's still all Armenian to this day and all Christian. So that is how my grandparents, well, let's say the rest of the people who were moved and made to walk the death march in the desert, a lot of them perished in the scorching heat. The women were snatched, they were raped, the children, some of them were taken and given to Islamic, Turkish families, so they were converted. But whoever survived here, this death march, formed the diaspora here in in Syria and in Aleppo, and many of them moved later on to Lebanon, that day it was a part of, it was called Palestine, but today there's a whole Armenian quarter in Israel, so there's a diaspora there as well as a diaspora in Egypt and in Iraq. So that is how Armenians ended up, whoever survived of those almost 2 million people, 2 million Armenian people lived in these villages here, 2,900 villages all over this area, either slaughtered very brutally or made to die in this desert or came to die in this desert, and whoever ended up in these areas became the diaspora in Iraq, Syria, Lebanon, Israel, and Egypt. So that is how my parents ended up, and my grandparents ended up in Lebanon. My parents were born in Lebanon as well, and that is how we are Lebanese today. So you might ask, so how did this Armenia survive? Well, the thing is, this Armenia, Turkey did try to come in here as well to take this part as well, because they wanted to wipe it out completely, but this part was under Soviet protection, so they couldn't come near it. In 1918, this part gained its independence. However, in 1920, it was made a part of Soviet Russia. So, but that is how this is the only land that we have out of all of this. So in 1991, it received its full independence from Soviet Russia as well, and became the Republic of Armenia. But this little part, as Roger was saying, there's a little land here that was fully inhabited by Armenians as well. It's called Nagorno-Karabakh. In the 1920s, Stalin, as he said, he decided, like, okay, this is it. This is you, Armenia. This is you, Azerbaijan. Noting that Armenia is a very old nation. Azerbaijan is actually a modern state. So he's like, this is your borders. And this little land, which was Armenia, he's like, I'm giving that to Azerbaijan. So recently, Azerbaijan is like, that is my land. And not recently, they had been perpetrating lots of atrocities over the Armenians here in this part. And recently in 2020, they actually went in and completely, like, they took every part. So we lost this land here as well. And there was an ethnic cleansing happening even recently in 2023 over the Armenians here. So we lost that land just because Stalin decided that it belonged to Azerbaijan. There were lots of 3rd century churches, heritage, monasteries that when they took over in 2023, they actually brought down all of it. They brought down all those beautiful old churches, and they're like wiped out everything. They're wiping out everything that's Armenian in that area to say this was ours. So that is basically the story of how we ended up in the diaspora and later on here.
Thank you. Thank you. Isn't that, I mean, it's historical. Isn't it fascinating? Just like, I was going to ask you, like, before you came in, right? I just want to show of hands. Like, how many of you have heard of the Armenian genocide? Okay, let's do it this way. Who didn't? Who hasn't? Yeah, it's about half and half, right? It's about half and half. And so, okay, let's go to page 2. All right, so what we're going to do is look at Armenia in the Bible, and then we're going to look at some themes in the Bible. Okay, we're going to look at Armenia, how it's referenced in the Bible, and then we're going to look at some themes. So in letter A, to the references in the Bible, it's the ancient kingdom of Ararat, okay, along with possibly smaller kingdoms of Mini and Ashkenaz, and these are found in Jeremiah 51. Jeremiah 51, which we'll look at later. And so they're assumed by scholars and historians to be references to the geographic region known today as Armenia. And so the mountains of Ararat, where Noah's ark rested, is a mountainous land or a kingdom known as Ararat. Now, Ararat is mentioned, as I said, 4 times in the Bible. It's mentioned 4 times, but it's only 3 references. It's 4 references, but 3 stories, or 3 different stories. So the first one is in Genesis 8:4, when Noah's ark rested on the mountains of Ararat, okay, which we'll go into that. The second one is in 2 Kings here, 19, and Isaiah 37. It's when Sennacherib, he was the king of Assyria. He tried to conquer Jerusalem. Remember, he came, and he's the one that overtook the 10 northern tribes of Israel in 721 BC. And he came after that towards Jerusalem, and God intervened miraculously in that against Sennacherib, and then his 2 sons went and killed him. killed the father, and then they escaped to Ararat. And it's two narratives of it. One's in 2 Kings and one's in Isaiah 37. And so it's used there. And then the last one, Jeremiah 51, which is really interesting because Jeremiah 50 and 51, as we'll look at, is a prophecy about Babylon. Okay? Jeremiah 50 and 51 is actually the longest prophecy in the Old Testament. And it's prophesying about both historic Babylon with Nebuchadnezzar, about God's judgment on Babylon, but in it, he's also talking about the prophetic destruction or judgment of harlot Babylon of Revelation 17 and 18. Okay, and so when we look at it, we'll look at it briefly, and I can show, I have a whole other teaching on that, how it correlates, but it's really talking about the judgment of harlot Babylon of Revelation 17 and 18, which is yet to come. Okay, which is yet to come. So Roman numeral 3, let's look at some of these passages. So the prophetic themes of Armenia. Okay, letter A land of God's rest and peace. Armenia is to be a land of God's rest and peace. So after the flood that covered the earth, God caused the ark to rest on the mountains of Ararat. It's significant that he chose this place for the ark to rest and that the judgment of the flood would come to an end. Okay, remember, God destroyed the entire world, all the inhabitants, and left one family of 8, Noah's family, and he restarted the population right here in Armenia. And so this revealed God's desire to rest from judgment and was symbolized by the dove that found rest in this land and without coming back to the ark. Because remember, he sent out the dove, and the dove came back, waited a week, sent it out, it came back with an olive branch, and then waited another week, and then the dove never came back. And the dove really represents the rest that God has. But I think it's really significant that when you just look at the world as a blank slate, like look at that map. You can take your little boat, your ark, and you can place it anywhere you want. And the question is, why did God choose the mountains of Ararat? Okay, why was it so important and significant that he did that? Remember, he's the sovereign, wise, uncreated God. He could have put it anywhere, and this is where he put it. Right? And so really, it's a land of God's rest and of God's peace. Okay? Letter B, after he did this, you'll see here in Genesis 8, verse 20, it says, then Noah built an altar to the Lord. Okay? And then he took and he offered burnt offerings. And then he makes the covenant and says he'll no longer destroy the earth by the flood again. And he gives the rainbow, the bow, as the sign, the physical sign. And so here, when Noah built the altar, we should know by now what the altar stands for and represents. It's really a place of worship and intercession, the altar before God, calling on the name of the Lord. And so here, even before Abraham in Genesis 12 and 13 and onwards, in Genesis 8, Noah built the first altar here. He builds this altar here, and after the flood, it's the first place in the Bible that an altar of worship and intercession was built. We witnessed a demonstration of the role of the priesthood displayed as worship and intercession, this altar being built and the burnt offerings. It's the 1 Peter 2:5, the spiritual offerings that we give. It's what it represents here. It's the intercession, and it moves the heart of God so that he creates this covenant of mercy. He releases mercy into the earth with this covenant where he says that he will no longer destroy the earth again. And so God's chosen Armenia to model the priesthood to the nations to release mercy into the earth. They're the place that mercy was received, okay, the touch point, and they're called to release mercy into the earth. Now, what's interesting is when you look at that map, Armenia is on top of, kind of, over all of the Middle East, right? Strategically, it's on top of the Middle East when you look at it. I mean, you have Turkey next to it. But with Armenia here, it's Muslims that surround it and all down here into the Middle East, Northern Africa here, Libya, Egypt, and all of that, Morocco, all of that. And it's like some of the prophetic words over Armenia is that they would train and they would send forth from here as a witness into the Middle East and the witness into the Armenians, not Armenians, but into the Muslims, right? And just strategically, and that's actually why Triad, this missionary group, went there, because one, it's safe to train, and they can receive people from all over the nations that would come here, and then strategically, they would train there, and then they would begin to send them down into the Middle East and Northern Africa, okay, and Southeast Asia. All right, letter C, page 3. It's a land of covenant. So Armenia is the first place that God made a redemptive covenant with mankind. It's also the only other place in the Bible where God made a covenant with mankind other than Israel. This is both very unique and significant that God chose this land to institute the covenant with Noah. God's covenants are always the ways in which he reveals himself, and then through his covenant, he reveals prophetically of what he's going to do and how he's going to do it. Right? The covenant with Noah, the covenant with Abraham, with David, these covenants are really important because they're initiated by God, and they reveal a nature of who God is. And here, when he makes this covenant in Genesis 8 and Genesis 9, it reveals the prophetic promises that he's made and wants to carry out into the earth. Thus, the people of Armenia have a prophetic call to share forth the knowledge of the God who makes covenant to the earth. Right? I mean, they have this, they're a missional people, that they've made this covenant there, and they're to show it forth. Now, I think what's interesting is this: as part of having a call to be a missional people, just like he did with Israel, the enemy has come against them and brought forth a Holocaust, in a sense, even in 70 AD with Israel, and it caused the diaspora of Israel to send them out so that they would share about Jesus and the gospel. And in the same way, what the enemies meant for evil, God uses even the Armenian people to be spread out and to sent out into the diaspora. It's really interesting when you hear her talk. That's how she terms it. This is how they understand it. And when you think about Israel, this is exactly what Israel, the dispersion or the diaspora of Israel, how they were spread out. Even in the book of Acts, the gospel going to the nations, it was because they were kind of located, centralized in Jerusalem and not going out. God allows persecution to come that pushes the believers out into Ephesus, into Antioch, Acts 13, into these different places. It's God's way of sending missionaries or witnesses out into other parts of the world. He uses what the enemy means for evil through genocide, Holocaust, murder. God uses it to propagate the gospel and to send forth laborers and witnesses. Right? We see it in the book of Acts, and we actually see it with the Armenian people as well. And so this diaspora that they've undergone, it's a scattering of the Armenian people because they're a missional people. And so here in Genesis 9, God says, I myself do establish my covenant with you and with your descendants after you. All right, letter D, it's a land of mercy and the glory of God. And so I think this is interesting because the sign of the covenant, we all know, is the rainbow, right? Is the rainbow. The rainbow is actually mentioned 6 times in the Bible, okay? I can see your heads going, you're trying to count, like go through the story, okay, of the different rainbows, or the bow, it's called the bow. 3 times it's mentioned, it's all in heaven. Okay, it's the scenes in heaven. 3 times it's mentioned, okay? The other 3 times it's mentioned as the bow here in Genesis 8 and 9. Okay? And so that's the only times that it's mentioned. Now, I think when it talks here, let's look at this verse. Next page, page 4. Because I think we all understand the rainbow on the earth, it's a sign of mercy. It's a sign of God's mercy. But the rainbow in the heavens, okay, look what it says in Ezekiel 1:28. And as the appearance of the rainbow in the clouds on a rainy day, so was the appearance of the surrounding radiance. Such was the appearance of the likeness of the glory of the Lord. meaning the rainbow is a sign of his glory in the heavens. It's like the emerald green rainbow of Revelation 4. It's a sign of God's glory. Okay? And Moses brings this together, because in Exodus 33, Moses is saying, Lord, show me your glory, show me your glory, show me your glory. And God says, I'll pass by you. But when he passes by in Exodus 34, look what it states. It doesn't state the glory of God. It says, the Lord, a God merciful and gracious. Meaning God's glory is his mercy. That he's merciful to sinful men. That in his nature, this is all about the Sermon on the Mount. He's merciful, compassionate. This is the glory of God. Because he could strike sin at any moment. Who can stand against the uncreated, awesome God that controls everything? Right? Nothing. No one can stand against him. He's exalted above everything else. But in his exaltation, what does he do? He has mercy. And his mercy shows forth his glorious compassion, his heart, his love, his patience. And so it's really the same reality. His glory is his mercy that's revealed. And this is a place in Armenia where the rainbow, was first given and established there. And so the glory of God, it's a place where he revealed his mercy to mankind in spite of sin, and restated to humanity the commission to fill the earth with the knowledge of God. Okay? And so the Armenians are called to declare and reveal the mercy of God as they've revealed mercy, and to show forth the knowledge of the God of the covenant. All right, page 4, letter E. It's a people called to bless the Jewish people. Okay? It's a people called to bless the Jewish people because from Noah, he had 3 sons, remember, Ham, Shem, and Japheth. And the very first promise concerning Israel was given in the nation of Armenia. Okay, think about our biblical storyline. Before Abraham is called in Genesis 12, okay, at the end of Genesis 11 into Genesis 12, you have Noah, and it's actually through Shem that in Genesis 10, the table of nations, Genesis 10, really shows the nations. In Genesis 10 and 11, it's through Shem that Abraham is called. And it was the God of Shem. And here, in Genesis 9, part of after Noah gets drunk, remember what his 3 sons do, right? 1 exposes him, 2 goes backwards and covers him. And so Ham, or Canaan, is cursed, but Japheth and Shem he blesses, and he says, may God enlarge Japheth and let him dwell in the tents of Shem, and let Canaan be his servant. And really saying, may God enlarge Japheth, which is the Gentile nations. Okay, and the tents of Shem is really the tents of Israel. It's the tents of Israel because that's where Abraham came out of, a direct lineage out of Shem. And it's the God of Shem. And so Noah declared that there was a plan of blessing for the nations, that God would enlarge Japheth. Think about Romans 11, the parallel. That God would enlarge Japheth of the nations. Or in Romans 11, the fullness of the Gentiles would come in, and then all Israel would be saved. Right? And here it's God will enlarge them, and God himself had chosen the descendants of Shem, which is a nation of Israel, as his dwelling place. And so we believe the Armenians are called to labor for the fullness of the Gentiles. Okay? In laboring for the fullness of the Gentiles, which will lead to the blessing of the Jewish people. This is what Paul says in Romans 11, where he goes, let his ministry be magnified among the Gentile people. He's going, let it be magnified, because if it's magnified among the Gentiles, it will bring forth the salvation of the Jews. And so in a roundabout way, he's going, I want to magnify my ministry among the Gentiles so that the Jewish people can be saved and that they can be blessed. Right? And so it's really interesting because before Israel was even a nation, God already put these in order, or it already began this idea of blessing Shem through the enlarging of Japheth. Okay. All right, letter F. Okay, it's a land of safety and a land of refuge. Now, what's here, and we looked at the two verses, 2 Kings 19, 36 and 37, and then Isaiah 37 and 38. I'll just read it here. So Sennacherib, king of Assyria, departed and went away, returned home. His sons, Adramelech and Sharezer, struck him down with a sword, and they escaped into the land of Ararat. Okay, they escaped there. So historically, Sennacherib was the king of Assyria who tried to destroy Jerusalem, but God miraculously intervened. Okay, it's like, and so the first half of Isaiah actually is talking about Assyria coming against them, okay, and how to prepare, because Assyria was coming to destroy and to take over the 10 northern tribes of Israel. His two sons killed him and fled to the land of Ararat. Now, what's interesting is this. Prophetically, okay, Sennacherib is a picture of the Antichrist. He's a prophetic picture of the Antichrist who will come to seize Jerusalem, but God will deliver Israel after a time. Okay? And the reason we know this is because the Antichrist is actually called the Assyrian. He's actually called by this name, the Assyrian, meaning that the Antichrist will come out of the land of Assyria. That's part of it. He'll have some of the traits of Assyria and its anti-Semitism. Okay, but it also was prophesied by the leader of Assyria at this time. It was Sennacherib. So I gave you the verses here. It's Isaiah 10, 24, and then Micah 5, 5 and 6. You can look it up later. But he's called the Assyrian. So the Antichrist has a number of names, but we know it's the same person because they do the same thing. He's just defined or called by different names. Okay, so he's also called, we just went over this in our class. He's called the little horn, okay, in Daniel 7. He's called the Assyrian. He's called Gog in Ezekiel 38 and 39. He's called Gog of Magog. Paul names him, John names him the Antichrist. Paul names him the man of sin, okay, in 2 Thessalonians 2. And so there's a number of different names for him, but he all does the same thing. That's how we know who he is, because of what he does and then the time frame in which he does it. And so here, the Sennacherib's death gives us insight into Armenia's calling as a place of safety and refuge for those who are fighting against the Antichrist spirit and Babylon in the last days. Even when we look at this map, we're like, you see, it's close to Iraq, it's close to Babylon, and in the midst of it, there's a Christian nation that's a place of refuge. It's Armenia. Okay? You know what's even another thing, just currently, so the Send, which did like in, where is it, Orlando, Kansas City, Brazil, it did massive events, stadium events in Brazil. The Send, they want to do a Send event in the Middle East. Okay, they felt like the Lord said, do one in the Middle East. The problem is this. You can't just gather Christians in a stadium. They'll probably blow it up. It's just dangerous, It's not legal, or it might be legal, but it's dangerous. And so they're praying, okay, how do we, do a Send in the Middle East? And then they were praying, and they heard Armenia. Do it in Armenia. It's a place of refuge. It makes sense. It's a Christian nation. It's close in proximity. They can send laborers from there, and people can gather from there. And so part of, I think, what we're going for is to prepare the house of prayer. They're wanting to start a house of prayer. But then Andy Bird from YWAM, Kona, he's one of the leaders of the Send. He's coming a week after we are with some other people, and they're going to do some events. But he's coming as a preliminary event of gathering and kind of scouting out the land for the Send in May of 2025. Like, they want to do a big Send in Armenia in the May of 2025. So a year from now. But the foundations of that Send, I believe, is going to be this little prayer room and the gathering of churches together and of unity and worship and prayer. And so we're like, it's really cool because you see God's, just his thread storyline. Just like this, it's a land of refuge and safety, right? And that's what they've chosen. And so It's a real honor. Okay, let's turn to page 5. This will be our last point. It goes together with this, with the last one, with the letter F. It's a land call to fight harlot Babylon. Okay? And so one of the primary prophetic calls on Armenia and her people is to be a revival center that will fight against the wickedness and immorality of harlot Babylon polluting the earth. So Revelation 17:18 is very clear. This is Satan's strategy, right? Because the harlot Babylon is carried by the beast, the Antichrist, and it's his strategy to use this harlot Babylon economic and religious system. Okay, so I'm just giving you just snapshots. We've studied it quite a bit as a staff. But the harlot Babylon to pollute the earth, right, and to get people away from their native faith. Now, here in if you look here in Jeremiah 51, verse 27, so interesting. It says, lift up a signal. If you read it in context, it's talking about harlot Babylon and its destruction, actually, and its destruction. It says, lift up a signal in the land, blow a trumpet among the nations, consecrate the nations against her. And look what it says. Summon against her the kingdoms of Ararat, Mini, and Ashkenaz. So he's saying, summon these Armenians against harlot Babylon. So interesting. It says, appoint a marshal against her, bring up horses, and it goes on. Now, how do we know? Because in verse 28, I didn't put it in, but verse 28 talks about the Medes, actually, Medo-Persia, because historically, Babylon was conquered by Medo-Persia. Okay, you had Nebuchadnezzar, okay, and then in 530, around 536, 538, you had Cyrus of Persia conquered Babylon. And so Jeremiah is writing ahead of time. So he's referencing the destruction and the judgment of Babylon, both by the Medes and the Persians. Okay, he's doing that. But he's also looking ahead into the future to harlot Babylon. And he's describing multiple times about harlot Babylon's destruction at the end of the age. Now, harlot Babylon has two destructions. If you look at it, I believe harlot Babylon has a destruction at the end of chapter 17 of Revelation, okay, which is at the midpoint of the tribulation. It's when the beast actually and the 10 horns burn her. So that says, I think it's verse 26, I think, Revelation 17. But she gets burned, and then at the end of the tribulation, right before Jesus comes back in Revelation 19, God sends judgment, open judgment on harlot Babylon. What's interesting is this, that judgment at the end of Revelation 18 begins Revelation 19 with a fourfold hallelujah. Okay? Meaning they're praising and worshiping God because God dealt with harlot Babylon, which had killed the saints and polluted the earth with immorality, harlotry, and idolatry for an entire generation. Because the harlot Babylon system was in bed with the kings, it says, of the earth, as well as the merchants. And she has this gold cup on the outside, but it's full of immorality. Right? And it's the spirit of harlot Babylon that's actually polluting and drawing an entire generation of people on the earth towards immorality, towards greed, a lot of wealth, towards harlotry and idolatry. And God judges her at the end of chapter 18. And you won't see this word, which is hallelujah, right? You can fact check on me on this. I don't think it's anywhere else in the Bible except in the Psalms. It's interesting, actually. We say it all the time, but I don't think it's found anywhere else. It's used 4 times in chapter 19. The destruction of harlot Babylon goes from at the end of chapter 16, all of 17, all of 18, into 19. And then we see Jesus come in verse 11. He splits the sky, and he comes on the white horse. But it's all on the tails of the destruction of harlot Babylon. Okay? And Revelation 17:18 is the longest prophecy in the New Testament. It's about harlot Babylon, actually. And it's tremendously insightful. I've said it many times. I think Revelation 17:18 are probably the most insightful chapters in the book of Revelation. Because we know about the judgments. We know about the Antichrist. He's bad. He's going to kill a lot of people. Okay, we know that Jesus is coming back for a bride that's spotless and pure. But what we don't know, and what Revelation 17 and 18 gives us, is the strategy of the enemy in that last generation. Okay? It's Revelation 17 and 18. That spirit of harlot Babylon. Now here in verse 29, so going back to verse 29, about Babylon here, here's how we know that Jeremiah is talking about the end-time harlot Babylon and not historical Nebuchadnezzar Babylon. Not harlot, but Babylon. It probably was a harlot, but it's not called that. So we want to be biblically accurate. You guys are like, okay, whatever. Anyway, it's a joke. Haha, okay. So let's look at verse 29 in context. Okay? Because remember, he's talking about the destruction, and you can read it earlier, but in 28 talks about Medes. Verse 29, so the land quakes and rides, for the purpose of the Lord against Babylon stand. And here it is, to make the land of Babylon a desolation without inhabitants. This is a key phrase, that it's a desolation without inhabitants. Okay, because in Jeremiah 50 and 51, this phrase is used multiple times. That when God's ultimate final judgment comes on Babylon, there will not be inhabitants in that land again. Now, when Babylon was conquered by the Medes and Persia, guess who are still living in that land? Inhabitants. Like Omri was just, they went, because he texted me, he says, I bet you don't know where I'm at, you're jealous, right? Because he was in Babylon, right? He was just south. So I'm like, I want to go see Babylon, because they're rebuilding it right now. They've been rebuilding it, okay? And so it's south of Baghdad and this way. I don't know which way that is, but so it's a little bit south, maybe an hour south of Baghdad, something like that, 50 miles, something like that. So it's still alive, or it's still present, and there's inhabitants that dwell there, and they're actually rebuilding it right now. So what does that tell us? That means this Jeremiah 51 passage was not fulfilled entirely in historical Babylon, because there's still inhabitants there. What it means is, for this to be fulfilled, it's actually speaking of a future time. And when we scan the panorama of the scriptures, it's talking about another Babylon that will arise. Okay? That's in Revelation 17 and 18. And when that judgment comes, then there will be no inhabitants left after Revelation 18. Right? And so when we look at it in context, it's actually yet future. And in God's wisdom and God's plan, he says, there will be a place where he'll pour out his spirit, and there will be a place of refuge and safety. It's in the mountains of Ararat, because Babylon is really close to there. Okay, when you look at the map, it's really close. It's probably about a couple hours of flight, plane ride from there, right down, and God will use this place. Now, what I didn't go into, because I didn't have time, I was researching some of this, was that there have been outpourings of the Spirit in Armenia in history. There's supposed to be a big one before 1906. The move in, what's it called, in California, Azusa Street, before Azusa, okay? That was like, 1901, 1905, all that. Before that, in 1891, they believe there was a outpouring of the Spirit in Armenia, in 1891, actually, that preceded the work of Azusa Street. Because from Azusa Street, the Pentecostal movement went all around the world. Right? It went all around the world, into Africa and everywhere, Europe, everywhere. And actually, it was God's mercy, because after that Pentecostal movement and thousands upon thousands being saved, you had World War I. Right? You had World War I. And so it was really God's mercy that before World War I, the Spirit of God was released with massive salvation around the nations. Right? And so there's that. And then there's also another move in the 50s, I believe, and like the businessmen's full gospel. Yeah, that was started by an Armenian, a guy from Armenia. There was a movement, and he's actually started, and that went around the world as well. Right? The full gospel businessmen's meeting, right? Or something. What? Yeah. So it's just really interesting here that I think as we start going, this is a place of righteousness that Armenia really has, because the Bible doesn't speak a lot about different nations, okay, other than those really in the Middle East and their prophetic destinies. Okay? There's a lot of judgments about them, but not a lot of prophetic destinies. And when it does, like, we want to capture and go, okay, how do we partner with this? Right? How do we establish the Lord's kingdom in that place so they can fulfill? Because we probably aren't going to be there, okay? But we want to labor for the people there that are going to play a critical role in the days to come. Okay? And so this is a little bit about Armenia. And so we are looking to go in a couple months. And the reason I'm sharing this is because I'm sure as we get ready to go, we'll share more. I think right now there's 6 of us going. Okay, right now there's going to be 6 of us going, and we're just going for a week. Okay, and we're not flying through the Middle East. So we're actually flying through Europe, so it's a lot safer. The Middle East is just unpredictable right now. But we're really excited to go because part of it I feel like is that when Mike went in 15, like he started something, like something was ignited. And I think there's a place for us to kind of build on that there. And so we'll see what happens there. So that's just a little bit of history, background, because especially if you never heard of Armenia. It's so interesting when we got a van, right? And so we just got our big red got retired, okay, after like I don't know how many years. But so we went to this dealership down like an hour and a half away, and I was with Daniel and Luke, and the guy's phone connected. Right? We're going for a test drive. It connected. All of a sudden, worship music comes on. So we all look at each other. And so I go, are you a Christian? And he's a Christian. So we start talking. But then we start talking, and then they left, and I'm doing the paperwork. And he's, I don't know how we got talking. He's Armenian. I was like, this is interesting, you know? Maybe it's just my antennas are up now. And so he's telling me, he's starting to tell me some of their history, too, just like they are. And very interesting. There's a lot of Armenians. And he was talking about Arabs and Muslims and it's things like that, but he's telling me about his homeland, and so I was like, oh, this is so cool. So, okay, let's stand together. Okay. So actually, what I want us to do is we're just gonna I just want us to pray in groups together for Armenia and the Armenian people, not even for our trip, but really for God's prophetic promises over this people. And for God to establish, because like in any place, there's division, there's the Orthodox church, there's evangelical churches, there's spirit-filled churches. I mean, it's like anywhere else. It's great, it's a Christian nation, but there's a lot of division there as well. And so let's pray that God would visit this nation, that God would raise up its people, that they would fulfill this mandate. They would be a place of refuge, a place of righteousness, and that really God would establish night and day prayer there, right? This foundation for the Arabs to be saved. And so let's get in groups. We'll just put some music on, okay? And so just grab some people and let's just pray for this together, and then we'll end that way.